Well, welcome back to the hot seat. I'm delighted today to be speaking to Allan Wilkinson, who's a partner at Buzzacott's Hong Kong office. Welcome, Allan.
Thank you.
So, looking forward to seeing you today at the PCD lunch. We're here in Singapore at the Ritz-Carlton. We've recorded before an interview, a hot seat virtually, that we did some time ago. But for PCD members who've not had the chance to meet you before, it'd be interesting to hear a little bit more about your background and also the Buzzacott offering out of Southeast Asia.
Yeah. Okay, well, Buzzacott as a firm has been around for a long time, based in the UK. Quite a big office there, about 500 people, 550 people, something like that. And about 7-8 years ago, we decided to open an office in Hong Kong. So I've been with Buzzacott for about 13 years now, and I had the opportunity to come out here and start sort of developing business for our Hong Kong office about 5 years ago. Yeah. So I've been now in the region for just over 5 years.
So we're in Singapore today. The STEP conference is later this week. Be interesting to hear a little bit more about intermediaries you might work with based here. How do you tend to collaborate?
Yeah, so a lot of the firms in Hong Kong that we work with also have offices in Singapore, of course. And so we've got very accustomed to being introduced to them as their needs sort of develop and they need our assistance. So often we're introduced virtually, and then now, of course, we have opportunities to come here again and meet people. But most of the intermediaries we work with are in the private banks, the wealth managers, firms of accountants, but primarily the strongest relationships, the most important relationships we have are with the law firms. So mostly the US law firms who have similar kind of clients to us. Often the relationships that we have start with a relationship between the client and the lawyer, and then we're introduced to do the sort of accounting work and the tax compliance.
Okay, and what, just looking across Southeast Asia, I mean, which jurisdictions do you find you work with most often? Where do inquiries come from, where clients are resident?
Yeah, well, obviously Hong Kong is the main jurisdiction for us because we're based there, but we do have a lot of clients also in Singapore, and a lot of business contacts in Singapore. Other regions, I suppose, the Philippines, Taiwan, mainland China, to some extent also Thailand.
And who's your typical client?
Yeah. Well, we provide UK and US private client tax services. So our clients tend to be private individuals who need one or other of those two services, sometimes in some cases both. So a lot of our clients are US citizens who are based here in the region, or green card holders, or people who have an interest in the UK or the US, whether it's an investment or some kind of business interest, or they're planning to relocate there. So these are the kinds of inquiries that we get as people who have those ongoing compliance needs or planning needs because they're a US person, or people who are relocating or have business interests in either the US or the UK.
And I guess there's many traps for the unwary, in particularly investing in, say, the US market, people owning US equities, or people who might not realise the kind of exposures they've got to the US because they don't perhaps travel there. Or, I mean, what are some of the traps that people might fall into in respect of the US with their investments?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the biggest one is the estate tax exposure. So this is where we sometimes come into contact with people here who are not US citizens or green card holders, but wanting to invest in the US market. You can find that you have a very serious kind of estate tax exposure, because for non-resident aliens, the threshold for estate tax is only $60,000. So you don't need to have very many assets before you're exposed to a 40% tax if you were to pass away owning those assets. So this is something that a lot of people don't know about. and there are things you can do to structure your way out of that exposure, or to prepare for it. So that's one of the problems that we see quite a lot.
And it's also reporting, isn't it? If people have like an LLC, a US entity, there's reporting obligations that are there that they might be unaware of, have ignored, need to actually put right. Is that something you also see perhaps from this part of the world?
Absolutely, yes. Often there's a compliance failure or gaps in the reporting because people haven't been fully aware of what the requirements were in relation to a particular entity that they might have, or some sort of business or investment interest. So we help people in those situations to make disclosures if they've got gaps in their filings or forms that they should have filed and they haven't. That's quite a typical type of client for us.
And do you help people with expatriation if they're based over here, they have got a US tax exposure, they don't see that as part of their future, they need to work out how to be compliant and exit that. So how might you help a client assess that opportunity?
Yeah, well that's very common in the region because we have a lot of clients who come to us, and we describe them as accidental Americans. So they might not really feel American. They may be originally from this region or based primarily in the region, perhaps Americans just because they were born in the US, maybe not spent much of their life there. So these are typically people who may have very complex arrangements outside of the US, but because the US taxes on a worldwide basis, they've then got some very complex filings that are required if they retain their citizenship. So these types of people often do want to give up their citizenship, but you have to become compliant before you can do that. So you need, when you go through the expatriation process, you need 5 years of compliance, basically. So the first step is to, however complex those filings might be, the first step is to regularize those gaps, and then you can do the expatriation. And so we help with that regularization, the filing of back years through whatever program is available to them, and then we'll do the final filings and help them to complete the expatriation process.
Okay, thank you. And on the UK front, there is also some complexity around domicile. That's often can be misunderstood by people who have been out of the UK for a long time. Yes. How do you see UK domicile and UK estate planning kind of catching people out, I guess, in the region?
Well, it does, and people confuse domicile, the concept of domicile, with residence, and often domicile is overlooked because a UK citizen, a UK non-resident citizen is not taxed on their income unless it is UK sourced income, right? So people often think that if they've been outside the UK for a long time, they don't have any tax exposures. But domicile is a far more sort of far-reaching concept. It's less well defined than residence in law, but it basically is where your long-term home is. And it follows you wherever you go. So your domicile is basically follows your parents' domicile when you were born. So if you were born to UK parents, and then doesn't matter, you might have lived outside the UK for 30 years. If you haven't done anything to shake off that, what we call domicile of origin, then you do have some tax exposures, and the primary one is estate tax, inheritance tax. You can be taxable on your worldwide estate if you pass away as a UK domicile. So we do get quite a lot of inquiries about that when people realize that they have this exposure. And there are things that you can do if you consider that you no longer really have that UK domicile, if you've given up your attachments to the UK in favor of another jurisdiction. But it needs to be documented. It needs to be properly documented so that when you do pass away, there's something that speaks for you after your death. So those kind of clients, we often work with lawyers to help them to make that case for having broken their UK domicile and acquired a new one somewhere else. And then you have that document that goes alongside the will, which helps to make that case after they've passed away.
And trusts are often part of the picture with high and ultra high net worth clients, particularly who have been resident in the UK, because trusts are extremely useful as part of the overall wealth planning. But what kind of issues do you see coming up with trusts? Where do you provide advice to people who are considering using a trust in succession planning with a UK UK connections?
Well, trusts can be very useful, but they come with a health warning, and quite a lot of people that we work with don't actually need trusts. They might need some fairly sophisticated planning with bank accounts and things like that. If they're moving to the UK and they're non-UK domiciled, they may have some advantages available to them if they're able to sort of segregate their income and then use what we call the remittance basis of taxation. So that we see sometimes. Often people come to us thinking they just need to throw everything into a trust and then it will be safe. It may well be the solution in some cases, but in many it's not really necessary. So a lot of what we do is talking about the other options that might be available for planning before you get to the more complex sort of planning around trusts. But we also see trusts a lot with US citizens, and there are some serious complexities for US beneficiaries of trusts, particularly US beneficiaries of trusts that are not US trusts. And of course we see that a lot in the region. And often it's when the grantor of that trust passes away and then the status of the trust changes such that the beneficiaries then have tax filing requirements and tax liabilities often as well. And that needs to be managed quite carefully. Distributions then need to be managed very carefully so that distributions are made at the right time, so that you don't have accumulated income which can be taxed quite punitively. So that's where we do most of our work, is probably on the US side with those kind of clients.
But getting that pre-arrival planning, particularly for the UK, is crucial, isn't it? I mean, what are some of the things people think about before moving to the UK?
Well, often people have real estate or assets that are appreciated in value. When you move to the UK and become resident there, by default, you're taxable on your worldwide income. As I mentioned before, that there may be some opportunities for non-domiciles who are resident in using a different basis of taxation, but the default is you're taxable on your worldwide income and gains. So if you have assets that have appreciated in value, and then you become resident and then sell that asset, you could end up with quite a big capital gains tax bill. So one of the simple things is just around disposing of assets that might have appreciated in value in advance of becoming resident.
Rebasing,
So exactly. Rebasing your assets so that you minimise that exposure.
Do you also see life assurance wrappers being used in a UK or a US context for these kind of as a holding structure?
Yes, occasionally. Life assurance can be quite complicated in the UK, especially, but it is sometimes useful for people who are moving to the UK, especially if they do that planning some time in advance. On the US side, foreign or non-US insurance products can be quite complicated. They don't often have the benefits that they might have if it was a US product for someone based in the US. But so often it's about sort of analysing these types of assets and deciding what you can do and what you can't do with them, and basically looking at the whole portfolio, really.
Great. We've got the Step Asia conference coming up this week. A lot of people in town, people excited to be back together. You're looking forward to catching up again with industry peers, and I mean, there's no doubt a good agenda for the conference. Is there anything you think people will be talking about, things that are topical, interesting, or is it just going to be great to literally be back in person catching up with everyone?
Well, it will be great to be back in person catching up with people. I mean, that's something, even within Hong Kong, getting around town and meeting people, that's it's only fairly recently that people have started to switch from virtual meetings to real life meetings. So that's the main thing. One of the things I see, one of the topics that I see repeated quite a lot in the agenda for the conference is crypto. That seems to be very much on people's minds at the moment, and an issue that has lots of complexities around it, legal aspects to it that people are interested in. So that's one of the big things. And then, of course, the issues for families, succession planning, those kind of things. These are the regular topics that we usually see. And there's going to be quite a lot of talk about that, I think.
Wonderful. Well, look, Allan, great to talk to you today, and we look forward to sharing this interview. Thank you.
Thank you.